Welcome to Aldea. This is our series Deep Tracks, where we are looking at a song, maybe a song that you're familiar with, or maybe like today, a song that might be new to you, but a song that can hold some meaning for us, offers some themes and some really interesting paths for us to go down and ask some spiritual questions. And so this song, What Was I Made For?, was the most recent Oscar winner for Best Original Song. It comes from the movie Barbie, if that wasn't obvious. And it's an interesting movie because the movie, whether you've seen it or not, it explores a handful of themes that you might not have expected to come from the Barbie movie. Themes around gender inequality, themes about capitalism, and in particular, this song, and when it's used in the movie, it draws out this other theme that really struck me. And it's this idea and this question, really, what does it mean to be human, right? What is the human experience? What are the challenges? What is the full range and spectrum of what it means to be alive here on Earth? And really, this movie is about a group of people that are not real, that are not human. See, Barbie belongs to a world in which everyone's fake. There's no loss, there's no pain, there's no death. She comes from Barbie land, a world that is untouched by reality. Right? It's not a real place with real stakes. And yet, the lack of reality is something that she begins to become aware of. And it thrusts her into what we might think of as an existential crisis. She starts thinking about death. She starts thinking about aging, and yet her world and the people in it are not equipped to deal with her level of curiosity and her level of questioning. Barbie's questions aren't supported by her community. They can't be answered in the place that she currently lives, in the place that she calls home. And so, like any hero's journey, and especially in the sense that Joseph Campbell talked about, that hero's journey cycle, we are invited, we are called, and Barbie is called to leave home, to discover something beyond that fake insulated world that she comes from. And any one of us who's been on a spiritual journey, who considers themselves to be on a spiritual journey, might relate to this level of risk and change and transition. Right? Maybe you left the faith of your family. Maybe at different times in your lives you asked some questions of reality. And these changes, these shifts, they pulled us out of the safe and comfortable world that we had known and into a deeper form of reality and a deeper form of life. And so this is something that I find to be explored by this song, and really even that title question of this song, what was I made for? See, it's the question that in the Barbie movie, Barbie is asking. She's asking this question of life, right? What was I made for? And I think it's a question that we've all asked at one point or another. What was I made for? I like the way that this question is phrased. It's not simply who am I or why am I here, but using that phrase, what was I made for, it really speaks to this idea of purpose, right? What purpose do I serve? What is the point of all of this? And if we look throughout human history, it's a question that humanity has asked for hundreds of thousands of years. If you think about the various fields of study that we call the humanities, right? Philosophy, art, religion, these are all fields that are concerning themselves with these types of questions, right? For some of us, we might have found ways that we were able to answer this question. Right? Like maybe for you, your experience with religion at one point in your life answered this question. What was I made for? Maybe for you, your career provided, or still does, provides an answer to this question. Maybe your family provides an answer to this question. And so maybe you stopped asking. You stopped the wondering. You stopped the search. Yet for others, and I know I'd put myself in this group, I've found that for others, the more that we ask this question, as we continue to ask over and over at various stages in our life, what was I made for? It's like a thread that we pull that reveals this deeper internal journey. And it's one that I think is reflected in this song. I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what I was made for. What was I made for? You might be able to look back and think about an earlier point in your life where things were easier, things felt like floating, right? Where the answers were simple and clear, where you had certainty about your purpose, about what life was meant to be. I know for me, growing up in the religious upbringing that I had, right? I had this experience. I had those feelings of certainty. I had those feelings of knowing. In fact, even at a young age, I believed that I knew everything I needed to know because my religion gave me all the answers I needed. And now it's funny looking back, thinking that 16-year-old homeschooled Jake, really, he had all the answers. He knew he's good. Just consult him, right? But at the time, that was what it felt like. And particularly when it relates to that question, what was I made for? What is my meaning? What is my purpose? It was pretty simple. At that point in my life, my purpose, my meaning was to bring other people into my religion, was to get other people to see things exactly the way I saw them. We might have even used the term saving souls, right? This was my purpose, and I didn't have to question anything beyond that. But we all can relate to this experience. I used to know, but I'm not sure now. There's a moment and a time in our lives where this shift takes place from knowing into unknowing, from feeling like you have all the answers until recognizing that maybe there are some questions that can't be answered, at least not yet. And this shift that we make, we actually might call it wisdom, right? Like, how many of us would look at the people in our lives that we think of as the wisest, or maybe just people that we don't know personally, but people we look up to? Generally, they are people that recognize the limitations of their own understanding. Generally, they are people that are humble about their own knowledge. We might even think of Socrates, someone we considered one of the wisest people who ever lived. And Socrates had what we would call the Socratic paradox: I know that I don't know. Wisdom is about recognizing the limitations of your own knowledge. And yet, when we are first invited to see things this way, we first encounter that type of wisdom, it can be painful, right? Because there's a loss of certainty. There's a loss of the grounding that came with that knowledge, where we are invited to embrace reality, including the mystery, including what we don't know. Can you think of a time in your life where you made a shift from feeling certain about something to embracing the level of uncertainty that is just part of the human experience? And yet, there's something encouraging here. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks says, I believe faith is not certainty, but the courage to live with uncertainty. How often do we think of faith and doubt as enemies, right? You either have faith or you're doubting, right? Yet what's fascinating is from this perspective, it's actually from doubt, from uncertainty, that faith emerges. Faith is not the enemy of doubt, but directly related and connected to it. Faith is the courage to live with uncertainty, not having all the answers. That word faith comes from the Latin fides, which relates to the Roman, essentially was a Roman goddess, fides, the goddess of trust, the goddess of hope, or what we might call the goddess of good faith. And she appears she's printed and minted on Roman coins as if to say, hey, you can trust the government, you can trust the economy, you can trust the emperor that this money and its value will hold, right? Have faith in us. Now, what's interesting in this idea of trust and hope, not certainty, but trust, what we realize is it's not about knowing, it's not about having guarantees, it's about a level of trust, right? And of course, fides is where we get the word fidelity. When you talk about pledging fidelity to someone or something, right? You're not saying, I am pledging my fidelity to you because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you will never fail me, right? No, you're saying, I'm pledging my fidelity to you as an act of trust, right? Faith. Faith living with the courage, that courage to live with uncertainty. And it's a courage that we're going to need as we continue on this journey of life and this journey that is outlined in this song of letting go and of moving into new territory. Taking a drive, I was an ideal. Looks so alive, turns out I'm not real, just something you paid for. What was I made for? Now, I definitely had some Barbies growing up. I don't know, any guys out there want to admit how many Barbies you had? I think I had a few. But I also had a G.I. Joe, and for me, the G.I. Joe represented this unrealistic ideal because like all the G.I. Joes that I had like hardcore 6-packs, even like an 8-pack, you know? And so then I grew up thinking like, is this what just being a dude is? You know, we all just have to have a 6-pack, an 8-pack. But obviously Barbie, G.I. Joe, these archetypes that we grew up with, they represent these ideals and these ideals of perfection that we've looked back and said, hey, probably a little harmful, right? Maybe a lot harmful to hold this ideal of this is what a man or a woman looks like and presents, right? But what I love is that the movie Barbie actually addresses and plays with this dynamic. It acknowledges, yes, Barbie is not real, right? Barbie they are fake. And the journey that Barbie goes on is leaving this behind, moving from ideals into reality. Anytime we move from ideals into reality, we are taking a risk. But it's a move that we all make at different points in our life, right? Moving from a simplified view of the world, right? Maybe a fake, simple view of perfection, right? A false sense of safety that came from earlier worldviews, earlier understandings of life and society, and maybe just our sense of family. And we move into a life that is more real, a life that is more messy, a life that is more dangerous at times. This is often what we see just in that move from youth into adulthood, from naivete into wisdom. Now, that's not necessarily true for all of us. Some of us had to grow up very early and very quickly. But ultimately, we all move from a false sense of safety, right, or security into a realization of reality, of how the world is, right? We have to, in some ways, grow up to the human experience and all that it entails. And this is the journey that Barbie goes on. She grows up. She leaves behind her Barbie land, right? See, for me, my Barbie land was the religion that I grew up in. It kept me safe. It kept me certain. It even provided certainty around difficult topics such as death. I didn't have to question or have any curiosities about death because my religion explained, right, and had an answer for every aspect of those types of questions. And in essence, what my religion did for me was it gave me, wait for it, gave me a box, okay? Gave me a safe box, a little Barbie box to live in, right? Whether you think of it as having bubble wrap on life, right? Or having the plastic on, right? Like plastic furniture that you never use because it's covered in plastic. Or it's this box. Maybe it's not just your worldview. Maybe it's not just your spirituality. Maybe it's even your conception of God is almost like a box that keeps you safe, right? It promises perhaps physical safety. I know that my earlier understandings of spirituality and religion, there was a guarantee like you will be kept safe no matter what, and you will have meaning no matter what. No questions of meaning can ever penetrate this box. But we know that we're on this journey of evolving and expanding our understandings of meaning and purpose and what it means to be human. And yet, in order to get there, we must have the disorienting or vulnerable experience of leaving this box behind, losing that earlier way of seeing things. So maybe for you it was religion, maybe it was something else, right? Something that kept the plastic on in life, right? Maybe for your own just sense of well-being. So maybe you held some ideas that you didn't even realize you held, right? Like maybe if I'm the best wife or mother or husband or father I can be, then nothing bad will ever happen in my family. Or maybe if I work hard at my job my whole life, right? I'll never get laid off, right? Or no one will ever get promoted above me in the office. Maybe if I'm a good citizen and I work hard, my country will always take care of me. Maybe even something as simple as if I eat healthy and I exercise, nothing bad will ever happen to my body, right? I'll never get sick. But we all know that these are earlier and simplified understandings, and ultimately something will happen in life that will invite you and cause you to start to question and maybe even deconstruct the box, okay? Things will come. Life will happen. Maybe it's not something that happens to you directly, but something that you see in someone else's life. Life will happen, and it will be an invitation to begin to take the plastic off, right? Maybe it's a loss. Maybe it's a change. Maybe it's something, as we often say, once you see, you can't unsee. So maybe you see something in the world, and you can't unsee. You can't go back to an earlier understanding. In fact, it starts to feel like your box gets torn apart. And as much as you at times want to go back to that earlier simplified understanding, you can't go back to the way things used to be, right? Once you see, you can't unsee. You can't necessarily just rebuild an earlier paradigm when your consciousness, when your soul has demanded that you move further, that you expand, right? So for me, I relate quite a bit to Barbie because I too, at different times in my journey, began to ask questions that the people in my Barbie land, let's say my church, my religion, they were unequipped to answer. They couldn't go there with me. And so I had to go outside of the tradition, the box that I grew up in. But when we engage with this part of our journey, where we realize, all right, I need to step outside, I need to leave home, we don't exactly know where we are going. In some ways, it can feel like we've lost the map. Because I don't know how to feel, but I want to try. I don't know how to feel, but someday I might. Someday I might. There's an important shift that we make in life. And along the way, we lose the map. We lose the template for exactly where we're supposed to go, for exactly how life is supposed to look, exactly how we're supposed to feel. And this is far from an easy journey. In fact, it can be such a difficult journey. I know it has been for me at times. I almost can't really stand on stage and recommend it. Like, of course, I would love to say, yes, go on your spiritual journey and we are here to support you and all that. But at the same time, if someone were to say, hey, was it painless, right? No, it's not painless, right? Any of us who have gone on these evolving faith journeys know that there's a lot of pain, right? Sometimes it feels like we barely make it through. And it's not for everybody, right? I know when I first started going to therapy, I filled out a questionnaire of my mental health, right? So my therapist could evaluate and see, how is he doing coming into this? A year later, I filled that same questionnaire out again to evaluate my progress. And in every category, I scored worse, okay? And of course, my therapist encouraged me because I'm paying him and he doesn't want to look like he's bad at his job. But actually what he said was really poignant. And he basically said, look, part of this is that in the process of doing this healing, working with generational trauma, you are uncovering and you are revealing things. And any kind of healing journey, many of us can attest to this, it probably feels harder before it gets better. It can be more difficult before it gets easier. Why? Why is this the case, right? Well, I love what Alan Watts says. This is the human problem. There is a price to be paid for every increase in consciousness. We cannot be more sensitive to pleasure without being more sensitive to pain. You can't just have it one way. Things don't just get easier without, in some ways, also getting more difficult, because it's a question of sensitivity, right? When we talk about this increase in consciousness, another word that we often use or phrase is waking up, right? Like we are waking up. And it's something that can be really difficult. Think about literally waking up, right? I know some of you, you're like, don't talk to me for at least 3 hours after I wake up. But the thing about literally waking up is that you're in this dream state, this sleep state that is often very comfortable, right? You're not thinking about your aches and pains. You're not thinking about the stress of being a fully functioning adult, right? And then when you wake up, you're thrust back into your life, which is a very difficult, sometimes disorienting experience, right? You have to put back on your aches and pains. You have to put back on your responsibilities. But also, we know that in the reality of waking life, there's so much more to be experienced and to be enjoyed. It's real, right? Whereas the dream world is not necessarily, in a material sense, real. And it's the same with our spiritual journeys, right? We must embrace that in order to become more conscious, we must become more conscious in every way. So we leave behind our versions of Barbie land, whatever that might be for you, and we embrace a world of greater beauty and greater complexity. And yet, naturally, we are going to experience this as a loss because we lose the ease and simplicity that came before. Where did it end? Or when did it end? All the enjoyment. I'm sad again. Don't tell my boyfriend. It's not what he's made for. What was I made for? There's some interesting questions being raised here. The first of which is this: is our highest purpose in life enjoyment, right? Now think about that. See, there's a branch of philosophy called utilitarianism, and some of the earliest utilitarian thinkers, basically they established this idea in philosophy that said, hey, what if the best way to live life is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain? And if you're building a society, what if the best way to live life is to maximize pleasure for the most amount of people and minimize pain as much as possible for the collective? And yet, over time, as different philosophers came along, they started to critique and invite this idea of utilitarianism to expand. And basically what they said, or what they asked was, are there different levels of pleasure or enjoyment or fulfillment, right? Are not all joys created equal in this life? And ultimately, in the 80s, a philosopher named Robert Nozick came along, and he was a utilitarian, and he had this thought experiment that's called the experience machine. And basically, the idea is that imagine that there is a machine or a box that you could walk into, and if you walked into it, you would have, your nervous system would basically be flooded with just joy and peace and content and no pain, and you could experience that indefinitely. The problem is that no one else would be any way connected to your experience. It would be completely your own experience, and it wouldn't have anything to do with anyone else. It would be you alone in the box experiencing that. And really, what Nozick was getting at and what he was questioning is if you could have an experience of joy, right, but it's completely disconnected from any types of values in your life, or you could have an experience of joy that's completely disconnected from other people, or you could have an experience of joy that's completely disconnected from being invested in anything outside of yourself, then is that the highest joy that you can experience in this life, right? And what we've come to explore throughout the journey of this song is that there are joys that are not instant, right? There are experiences that, though difficult, though painful, are very much worthwhile. How many of us have experienced in life a deeper joy from something that was challenging, right? Like how many of you have raised kids and you're like, this was the hardest thing I've ever done and at the same time the most rewarding thing I've ever done? How many of us have, really invested into a hobby or a creative pursuit? You created something. It was really difficult. It was challenging. There was fear and vulnerability. And yet at the same time, because you put yourself out there, it held greater reward. How about serving others, right? By its very definition, it's not something that is inherently focused on you, and yet it can create this deep sense of fulfillment and meaning and reward. What we see is that the amount of reward that we get from things often increases as our investment increases, as our connection to others increases, as our connection to our own sense of values increases. This is something that I experience time and time again with this community. I've found through many people's stories that what they get out of Aldea has often increased the deeper that they put into it, the deeper that they jumped into life here, the more they invested in other people, the more they began to become connected with other people, which, brief plug, which is why you should sign up for Intro to Aldea, and I wonder if this word that we're using, joy, is not the only or even best word that we can use in this circumstance. Maybe words like meaning, fulfillment, purpose are also incredibly valuable here, because what we are saying is that there are things that can be much greater than just simply feeling good all the time, feeling at ease all the time. There are higher forms of joy and reward. And yet it's something that you can't necessarily convince someone else to do or believe in, right? It's a journey that we must all take individually. You can't convince someone that there are better forms of joy out there. I have two younger brothers who are 14 and 15, and like any teenagers these days, they're pretty invested in TikTok and video games, okay? And God bless them. I love them, right? There's nothing else I don't need to convince them to do anything differently. Sure, I'd love to sit down with them and talk about some things that I'm interested in. Like, hey, have you guys ever thought about consciousness? Or like, is there a soul? Or like, I don't know, But that's not where they're at. It's all good, right? And this really leads us to a conversation about the Kens in our life, okay? I'm sad again. Don't tell my boyfriend. It's not what he's made for. See, what's interesting about the character of Ken in this movie, he is on his own journey. See, what's interesting is in the beginning of the movie, you kind of think that Ken and Barbie are in this sort of romantic comedy partnership where they're going on this partnered journey together and they're going to really find each other. And in fact, the movie kind of subverts your expectations. And again, spoiler alert, they don't end up together. They end up on their own journeys and in a lot of ways affirming each other on their own journeys. While Barbie is going on this existential journey, who am I, right? Maybe what we talked about last week as the second half of life, where we start to deconstruct and pull apart purpose, meaning, identity. Ken is still firmly in that first half of life. He's still in that early part of the journey of just building himself up, right? Becoming Ken. He's still just figuring out Ken, because really throughout the whole movie, he only knows himself in relationship to Barbie. And now he's like, oh, who is Ken, right? And so what happens is that he goes on his journey and she recognizes that she can't bring him into her journey, right? She can only just affirm him in his. And here's the reality, friends. We all have Kens in our life, right? Not just people named Ken, is what I'm getting at. And what do we do with the Kens in our life? We love them. We support them, right? We say yes to their journey, right? How many of you have someone in your life who, though you may love them, they don't fully understand every aspect of where you're at, right? They don't see everything that you see. They're not maybe asking some of the same questions that you are. We are always going to encounter others that aren't exactly where we're at. They don't see what we see, and that's okay because it's not your job to convince them, nor is it their job to meet you in every understanding that you hold. And that's not a measure of how much they necessarily love you or care about you, right? So you love them where they're at, and yet you can at the same time honor your own journey. But naturally, there is going to be a feeling of grief there, a feeling of losing support at times. I think I forgot how to be happy. Something I'm not, but something I can be. Something I wait for. Something I'm made for. Someone said to me recently that, or they really posed this question, what if the difficult and maybe even negative emotions that we feel are really just the flip side of desires that we have? Just as she says, I forgot how to be happy, recognizing maybe I'm not in this moment, but I know I can be. In the same way, what if our negative emotions are synonymous with our desires? Think about this. When you are feeling sadness, you are also experiencing a longing for joy, right? You want to feel joy. When you're feeling lonely, you're experiencing a longing for connection or community, right? When you're feeling anxious, you are also experiencing a longing for peace. And so there's a hope inherent to any difficulty we face. That something I can be is something that we all hold within us. Yes, there's pain in leaving the familiar, right? In leaving certainty, in leaving security. And yet there is also hope, because the very same thing that inspired and invited the leaving is also leading us somewhere. It's giving us an invitation to something. And I want to share a clip from the end of the Barbie movie. Again, mega spoiler alert. But it's a conversation that Barbie has with her creator. Literally, the creator of the Barbie doll, Ruth Handler, now played by an actress. But the idea is that she's speaking to her creator, and honestly, it's not unlike a conversation that you and I might have with our creator, were we given the opportunity to have this type of dialogue. And so I want you to kind of notice the nuance and maybe the way it subverts how we're traditionally thought to or we're taught to think about this kind of interesting conversation. So here we go. She invites her into life, but she says, here are the terms and conditions. Do you accept, right? Here is life, right? And has been said many times before, life is the full catastrophe, right? It's full of joy, and it also has pain. It has excitement and loss and fear and confusion. But if you say yes to it, you are not saying yes to only the good, right? Only the easy. And this moment that we come to, that she came to, right? It's not something that we just come to once. In fact, we come to these moments again and again and again. Maybe you've found little moments like that in your life, right? Maybe in your relationship with a partner, you reached 5, 10, 20, 25 years, and you said, yeah, looking back, we've had a lot of ups and a lot of downs. Do you want to keep going? Right? Or maybe you looked at your child and you said, this was such a difficult and beautiful experience. It took everything I had. Want to have another one? Right? I know for me, I was on a nature retreat a couple years ago called a Vision Quest, where you go out in nature and you fast for 3 days and you're alone, and it's a pretty difficult time, but it's really an opportunity to connect with yourself and really reflect and think about how you're showing up in the world. And then afterwards, you get back together with a group, and there was, as we were kind of doing our share, and every person was talking about their experience on the Vision Quest, there was someone from the group, and he said that throughout his experience, it was as if he was being asked, would you like to renew your subscription to life? Would you like to renew your subscription to life? I ask you this question today. Would you like to renew your subscription to life? See, for many of us, we probably turn on our television and we have all the streaming services available, right? And how many of us, if we're being honest, like we only have our own account for like one of them, and then we're borrowing passwords from our friends and our family, right? Like you might have Hulu, but then you know someone who has Apple TV and all that kind of stuff, right? And so you're just kind of, it's a hodgepodge thing. But the reality is when it comes to our subscription to life, our buy-in to life, we can't operate off of someone else's subscription, right? We probably recognize in our lives like this faith that I grew up with, wow, maybe it's not even my own faith. I need to really think about my own, right? Or this lens, this way I see the world, when I really think about it, I realize it was something that was handed to me, right? But when it comes to our subscription to life, our yes to all that life is, it's something that we need to do on our own terms. We can be afraid to often because of all that it might mean. Certainly, life will break your heart. Will you choose it anyway? Will you say yes to it anyway? There's a concept and an archetype in Buddhism and really in Eastern thought in general called the bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva holds various meanings depending on the form of Buddhism or different tradition that you are looking at. But in general, one way that you might understand the bodhisattva is sort of an awakened or enlightened being that despite their understanding of their connection to God or their unity or oneness with all things, they still choose earth. They still choose to enter back into the pain and difficulty and complexity of human life as a way of serving others. And it's interesting because if you even just look at, Jesus from a mythic perspective, that in the Christian tradition, Jesus is thought of as leaving divinity, leaving oneness, and coming into earth, saying yes to the difficulty, pain, and complexity of earth, even his own death out of love for others. Joanna Macy, the Buddhist teacher and eco-theologian, said that the heart that breaks open can contain the whole universe. All is registered in the boundless heart of the bodhisattva. Through our deepest and innermost responses to our world, to hunger and torture and the threat of annihilation, we touch that boundless heart. The bodhisattva says yes to all of it, right? Not just infinite love, but to reach infinite love, you also need to say yes to some of the deepest and darkest aspects of what it means to be human, loving the world for all that it is, not necessarily all that we want it to be. And so if you're like me, your spirituality or even your sense of God has evolved from one of Barbie land, one of protecting you and insulating you, into a lot more like this creator character of Ruth Handler, of someone or something inviting us into a deeper experience of life, right? So I asked this question to you today. Would you like to renew your subscription to life, right? Here are the terms and conditions, right? You will fall flat on your face, right? You will experience confusion, right? You're going to love and you're not going to know if you're loved back, right? You're going to try your best at something and it's just not going to work, right? And knowing that we only have a short time here, naturally you're going to experience grief and loss. And yet you're also going to experience joy that is only possible, not in spite of, but because of the fact that you're not in control. Joy and meaning and fulfillment that is only possible because of the fragility and the vulnerability of being a human being. The stakes are high. We have one shot at this, and that's what makes it so meaningful. Maybe that's what we were made for.